Alex Rider, Book 9, the start of Part 2. Alex. Chapter, I think it's 7. Chapter 7, Angle of Attack, page 129. Alex, you've overslept again. Get yourself out of bed. Jack Starbright was standing in the doorway of Alex's bedroom on the second floor of the house they shared together near the King's Road in Chelsea. It was 7:45 in the morning, and he should have been up and getting dressed, but all she could see was the back of his head with a clump of messy, fair hair poking out from under the duvet and the curve of his body beneath. Alex, she said again. A hand appeared, clutched hold of the pillow and dragged it down. What is it? What day is it, Jack? The voice came from nowhere, muffled beneath the bedclothes. It's Thursday. It's a school day. I don't want to go to school. Yes, you do. What's for breakfast? You'll find out when you've had your shower. Jack closed the bedroom door, and a few seconds later Alex emerged, screwing up his eyes against the morning light. He threw back the duvet and rolled into a sitting position, looking around the wreck that was his room. There were crumbled clothes, DVDs on the floor, school books and folders everywhere, DVDs and computer games stacked up beside his desk, Chelsea posters peeling off the walls. He and Jack had one of their very rare arguments a few weeks before. It wasn't that she wanted him to tidy the room. That wasn't the problem. In fact, it was the other way round. He had insisted that she stop tidying it for him, as she had done every day for the last 8 years. In the end, she had understood this was his space, and this was the way he wanted it. He stripped off his t-shirt and stumbled into the shower. The blast of hot water woke him up instantly, and he stood there, letting it pound onto his shoulders and back. That was his favourite part of the morning. 5 minutes where he didn't belong to anyone. Not to Jack, not to Brooklyn School, where he could collect his thoughts and prepare himself for whatever the day might throw his way. He wasn't a spy anymore. That was the important thing. That was what he had to keep reminding himself. Nearly 5 months ago had passed without so much as a whisper from MI6. He had made it through the second half of the spring term and 2/3 of the summer without being recruited, kidnapped, or forced into some hairy-brained mission. On the other side of the world, he was getting used to the fact that it was never going to happen again. He was tall now, 5'10". His shoulders had broadened, and he had virtually lost the little boy looks that he had been so useful to Alan Blunt and Miss Jones. His hair was longer. He was 15 years old. There had been times when he had thought it was a birthday he would never see. And what had happened in those 5 months' school, of course. His second term of GCSES. Alex had even begun to think about university. It was only 3 years away. He already knew that science and maths were his strong suits. His physics teacher, Miss Morant, insisted that he had a natural talent. I can see you at Cambridge, or at Foxford or Cambridge, Alex, if you just apply yourself and try to turn up for school a little bit more often. Then there was the sport Alex has been chosen as captain of the football first team, and drama he was playing Teen Angel in some production of Grease. Although he still wasn't convinced he could sing, he seemed to be home less and less, hanging out on the King's Road with Tom Harris and James Howell, who were still his two best mates. He played football at weekends and had joined a rowing club near Hammersmith. He was in the 15 to 22 group, and he loved the rhythm of it, slicing through the water early on the Saturday morning, down the Richmond and Twickenham, onto Hampton Court. Even if his muscles did ache for the rest of the weekend, the cocks barking out instructions The old-fashioned megaphone was a girl of his own age, Rowan gently, and she was obviously interested in him. He had joked that her name sounded like their progress up the Thames, but he was still seeing Sabina, even if most of their contact was through Facebook. It wasn't easy being thousands of miles apart with an 8-hour time difference. So that while Alex was getting up and frantically grabbing his clothes, she was still sound asleep. It was almost as if they were on different planets, and part of him knew that if she didn't return to England soon, it would be almost impossible to maintain the relationship. He hadn't seen her quite recently. Her parents had invited him out to San Francisco for 10 days during the Easter holidays, and Jack had stumped on the coast of the transatlantic flight. It had given her a chance to have a break too. It had been a fantastic holiday, something the two of them had promised themselves after the near-death encounter with Desmond McCain in Scotland at the start of the year. They had implored the city, the Golden Gate Bridge, Fisherman's Wharf, Alcatraz Prison, and driven down the winding coastal road to Big Sur, where they had spent the weekend hiking and camping in some of the most stunning countryside in California. As he pulled on his trousers and set about trying to find 2 matching socks, Alex remembered the last night he had spent with Sabina. 2 of them had sat on the porch of the white painted wooden house that Edward and Liz Pleasure had rented in Presidio Heights, a quite leafy part of the city. It was a brilliant night, the sky deep black and scattered with stars. I didn't wish you have to go home. Me too. It's crazy. You're my closest friend and you're thousands of miles away. When do you think you'll come back to England? Sabina sighed. Not sure we ever will. Dad's doing really well out here, and he's got his green card now, which means he can live here. He can live here permanently. Mum likes it. She put her arm around his neck. Do you think we'll stay together, Alex? I don't know. Didn't seem at any point lying. Probably meet some magical football player, and I'll never hear from you again. You know that's not true. Sabina paused. Maybe you can come back in the summer. You know you're always welcome. We could go to Yellowstone, or maybe to LA. I'd like that. I remember how Sabina had looked at him then, but it was the way she had kissed him goodbye that he remembered the most. He grabbed his shirt, but before he could put it on, he turned around and examined his shoulders, and it was something he did automatically every day. The burns had faded out. But they were still there like a series of exclamation marks. The scars from the burning aviation fuel had rained down on him in the airfield of La Capa in Kenya. The doctors had told him that they would probably stay with him for life. Well, he could add them to the museum of injuries that his body had become the bullet wound in his chest, the various scars and thin white line that had been seared across the back of his hand by, of all things, a poisonous spider webs. Did he miss it? Did he mind being an ordinary schoolboy again? Alex felt he had passed through a tunnel. There had been a brief time when he had needed the danger. He was almost glad to be part of the secret world of MI6. After all, that was what he had been trained for virtually all his life. His father had been a spy. His uncle had been a spy. Between them, they made sure that he would follow what had become a family tradition. But now he was out in the light. Enough time had passed since Kenya to remind him that the real life was better. Harold Sale, Dr. Grief, General Salve, LeMay and Gray, Miss Botman, Winston Yu, and most recently Desmond McCain come up against them, and they're all dead. It was time to leave them behind. He glanced at his watch. Despite Jack's wake-up call, he was going to be late for school. And this in the week was the head teacher, Mrs. Bray, had announced double detention for latecomers, part of Brooklyn's crackdown or personal discipline. One time it had been crooked ties and untucked shirts, next it had been chewing gum. Now it was timekeeping. It was good to have such little things to worry about. Alex buttoned up his shirt and looped his tie over his head. Then he hurried down to the kitchen for breakfast. There were 2 boiled eggs waiting for him on the table. Alex was amused to see that Jack was still insistent on cutting his toast into Marmite soldiers. She was making coffee for herself and tea for him, and as he took his place, she brought 2 cups over. Alex, you look like a complete mess. Your tie's crooked. You haven't brushed your hair, and that shirt's crumbled. It's only school, Jack. If I ran the school, I wouldn't let you in. She set the 2 cups on the table and sat down outside, watching fondly as Alex sliced off the tops of the eggs and dipped the first soldier in. Have you got any plans for this weekend? She asked. I thought maybe after you finished rowing, we could take off somewhere, get out of London. Actually, I'm away this weekend. Alice had forgotten to tell her. Where? Thomas invited me over. His brother's coming from Italy and we thought we'd get together. Tom Harris was as much of a mess as ever, living with his mother after his father had walked out. Alex had met his brother Jerry when he'd first gone chasing after Scorpia in Venice. Tom and Jerry, as Tom often said, the names told you everything that you needed to know about their parents. Okay, that's fine. But I had a toothbrush and a spare set of clothes. There was something in Jack's voice. It slotted her direction, but she seemed okay. She looked the way she always did, relaxed and a bit ramshackled, dressed in a t-shirt, jeans and a loose-fitting cardigan. She was sitting with her elbows on the table, cradling her coffee cup and smiling. But just for a moment, she hadn't sounded quite herself. Was there something on her mind? Is there anything wrong? Alex asked. No, she put herself together. No, I'm sorry. I just stayed up a little too late last night and I'm a bit tired. That makes sense. Jack had recently started learning Italian. Alex wasn't quite sure why. Jack closed the front door. She was annoyed with herself. She still hadn't talked to Alex about the letter she had received a week ago. It was typical of her mother to put it all down on paper rather than a phone or send an email. Her parents weren't that old, only in their 60s, but they had always been deliberately old-fashioned, and if they were determined to show that their world was better than the one that was all taking shape around them. Now her father was ill. He'd had a stroke. She'd had a stroke in the spring, and he needed someone to look after him. Her mother did what she could. Jack had an older sister, but she was living in Florida with 3 young children. Jack had now been in England for coming up to 9 years, and her mother was suggesting very gently that she ought to think about coming home. And in her heart, Jack knew that she was right. Maybe it was time to go. It wasn't just because of her father. She had her own future to think about. Here she was in London, almost 30 and single. She had first come to England to study law and had taken up to offer a free room in Chelsea in return for light housekeeping and babysitting duties. The baby, of course, was Alex, although in fact he had been 7 years old. In the early days, she would take Alex to school when Ryder was abroad, then slip away to do her studies until some pick him up. But she had soon discovered that law was dry and dusty and simply wasn't for her. At the same time, she loved looking after Alex. It was almost as if she knew his big sister, as if she was his big sister. She felt sorry for him too. She knew that both his parents had died in a plane crash. She could see that Iron Rider was no substitute, not when he travelled so much. Somehow, everything happened very naturally. Jack decided to leave university at the same time as Iron offered her a full-time job. Suddenly, without even really planning it, she had become part of the family. And then Iron Rider died and everything had changed. Had you ever wondered about her employer? He had told her he worked in international banking, and she had taken his word for it. But looking back, she knew she had been foolish. No international banker kept 3 different passports in his desk drawer. Jack had come across them once, looking for a pair of scissors, and she had asked him about them. It was the only time Iron Rider had ever been angry with her. Never ask me about my work, Jack. It's the one thing I'll never talk about, not with you, nor with Alex. She could hear his voice now, wondered how he could have been so stupid. No international banker stayed away for weeks at a time, and certainly none returned with so many inexplicable injuries. I had been mugged in Rome, involving in a car crash in Geneva, and had broken his arm skiing in Vancouver. He had joked about it, saying he was accident prone until the final accident had revealed the truth. And I said no, Jack had never told him was that she had decided to leave 2 weeks before Iron Rider had set off to Cornwall on the mission that had killed him. She had even gone as far as her typing her resignation letter. She'd felt dreadful. But she was sure she was doing the right thing. She wasn't going to be a nanny and a housekeeper forever, and the longer she stayed here, the harder it would finally be to break the bonds with Alex. She would still be his friend, visiting whenever she could, but it was time to move on. And then had come the news of Iron's death, the funeral, Alex's first meeting with Alan Blunt, and the almost incredible truth that Iron had been a spy working for MI6 all along. And that was when Alex had been recruited, and what had persuaded him to risk his life that first time, investigating the Stormbreaker computer. He hadn't done it for his country. He hadn't done it for the rest of his uncle. No. MI6 had threatened to expel Jack from the country, and he had agreed to help them in return for a permanent visa that she could stay. How could she abandon him like that? After that, as far as Jack knew, Alex had no living relatives. She had tried to find some trace of his grandparents, but it seemed that all 4 had died young. There were no uncles or aunts. The closest relative she'd been able to dig up was a cousin living in Glossop, and she couldn't quite imagine Alex starting a new life there, and so she had stayed. She was almost the only person in the world who knew his secret. So long as he was involved with MI6, nobody could take her place. All that seemed to be behind them now. The last time she had seen Miss Jones had been a few days before Alex's 15th birthday at St. Dominic's Hospital in North London. Alex had just got back from Kenya, badly hurt. And that was when she had finally put her foot down and insisted that there would be no further missions. That from now on, MI6 would leave him alone. Miss Jones had made no promises, but Jack had said that maybe she had won the argument. Suddenly, she had heard nothing since. In truth, Alex was probably too old for them now. He didn't look like a child anymore. Jack remembered how he once crawled up a chimney when he was training with the SAS. He wouldn't be able to manage that again. There were probably SAS men who were smaller than he was now. But if Jack believed that this part of their lives was behind them, there was one side effect that she hadn't foreseen. Alex didn't need her so much now. That was what it would all boil down to. He wasn't going to come home wounded with burns or bullet holes. There was no need to protect him, and the two of them were growing apart. Recently, Alex had begun spending more and more time without her, with his friends. Taking this coming weekend, for example, he casually mentioned that he was taken off with Tom Harris, and he hadn't even stopped to consider that he would be leaving her on her own. It was the same at Easter, when he'd been away for 2 weeks with Sabina. Jack didn't mind. It was how it should be. He was a teenager, but she didn't feel wanted. And that told her at last it was time to move on. All she had to do was tell Alex. She would leave at the end of the summer holidays. Together they would find someone to take over. More of a housekeeper. Of course it would be a rent for Alex too. He'd probably argue with her, but and again he'd see it her way. Jack was about clearing the breakfast thing. Set about clearing the breakfast things. She had put it off too many times already, but her mind was made up. He would talk to him when he got home tonight. Okay, we're going to start the warm-up. Donovan, head of maths, at Brooklyn School, pressed the button and 6 geometric shapes appeared on the whiteboard. Each one had an angle marked X. 3 of these diagrams, X equals 45 degrees, he explained. You've got 5 minutes to tell me which, and the first person to finish wins the week's bonus prize. Oh, it's better than last week's bonus prize, someone called out. The last one to finish gets a page of negative multiplications to take home. Those who did not go, and everyone put their heads down. I tried to concentrate on the shapes, but they were just floating in front of him, refusing to come into focus. All triangles looked the same to him, like one of those spot the difference puzzles in a magazine. It had been the same in English in it an hour ago, trying to make a sense of a passage from Shakespeare's Twelfth Night. If music be the food of love, or was it the love of food? And what did it mean anyway? He was finding it hard to think. You could see the words on the page when they refused to come together to make sentences. He put his pen down and ignored the triangle. There was something on his mind, and he wouldn't be able to till he had worked out what it was. He played back the events of the morning. He got out as usual. Showered and dressed, he finished his homework the night before. Nothing to worry about there. He knew his lines for the school play, no money worries. He still had plenty left from his weekly allowance. Then down to breakfast. He replayed the conversation with Jack, and in a particular moment he had told her that he would be away for the weekend. That was it. She had been upset. He challenged her about it. She challenged her about it, and although she denied, you could tell from her voice. Now that he thought about it, he realized that the two of them had been spending less time together recently. What with homework, the school play, rowing and football, all the rest of it, there were days when they hardly spoke at all. Suddenly he felt ashamed. Jack had always been there for him. She was always looking after him. But he had given her the impression that she didn't matter to him at all. He was outside the window. There was a building site across the road. A new block of flats going opposite the school. Everyone was already joking about who exactly would want to live with a view of hundreds of scruffy kids. Not to mention the noise at 8:30 in the morning and 4:15 every afternoon. The site was empty today. The builders seemed to come in more or less when they felt like it. Alex noticed a man making his way across the roof in a crouching run, a bag over his shoulder. What to do about Jack? Alex made a resolution. He would talk to her tonight. He would tell her that he would be lost without her, and that he needed her as much as now he had always done. Of course he knew all this, but it was still worth saying. And he didn't have to spend the whole weekend with Tom. Maybe he could come back on Sunday after the noon. Two of them could go to a local street market or something. The thought made Alex feel more comfortable as he returned to his attention. Back to the triangles. ABC was a right angle. 90 degrees. The other two angles couldn't possibly be the same. So no 45 degrees here. Cross that one out and move on to the next. A lean, ginger-haired boy called Spencer was aiming a missile at someone in the front row. His man suddenly a rubber on a plastic ruler which he was bending back. He released the ruler, kept pulling the rubber across the room. He missed the boy in the front row and bounced off the wall. Someone sniggered. Mr. Donovan had seen him. If you wanted to stay in the top group, Miss Spencer, try not to behave like a year 5, okay? He sounded more tired than annoyed. Yes, sir. 2 more minutes. I'm not even year 5, so that's pretty hard for me. 2. You should have cracked nearly all of them by now. There's someone near. He had suddenly aware. He wasn't feeling very well. It wasn't particularly hot in the classroom, but he was sweating. His forehead and the back of his neck were damp, as if he had a fever. There was something pounding in his head, and he found it difficult to breathe. What the hell was wrong with him? It was 11 o'clock in the morning. He hadn't had lunch yet. So he thought once the school canteen couldn't be blamed. He had a pain in his chest and realized that his old wound was throbbing like some sort of biological alarm clock. It had just gone off, and it was warning him. The man on the roof all of a sudden was back in Liverpool Street, stepping out of the offices of MI6 seconds before a sniper had opened fire with a bullet that had knocked him to the ground, almost killing him. What he had seen out of the corner of his eye? No, it was impossible. Couldn't be happening again. Not here. Very slowly, forcing himself not to give anything away. He turned his head. He was just a bored schoolboy looking out the window. He told himself, if there's really someone there, if they were focusing on him even now, he mustn't give them an excuse to fight. Because the man was a sniper. He had no doubt of it. Why else would he be running with his head down and his shoulders hunched unless he was carrying a long, narrow leather bag across his back? There was no sign of him now, but Alex's vision was the shape, the size of the bag, and knew with the ice cold grip of sanity exactly where it was contained. Not a spade, nor a drill, nor anything he might use to construct a block of flats. Anyway, nobody was working on the site today. The man was there for something else. He looked there and someone was still hiding. Alex looked again, saw a seemingly empty roof. Yes, there he was, lying flat on his stomach, with his head pointing towards the school. He was partly concealed behind a wall of scaffolding. A plastic sheet hanging in front of him, like a empty window. Alex couldn't see the gun, but he could sense it, and knew that there could be only one target it was aiming at. There was a sort of telepathy between the hunter and the hunted, or between the sniper and his target. And he couldn't possibly have known when the man was going to fire, but he jerked back instantly. It seemed to him that there was a faint tickle, and I thought at the exact same moment, when from him a gash appeared, as if by magic, in the surface of the desk. Splints of wood flying upwards, a stare at damage. The enormity of what had just flooded over him. Someone had taken a shot at him. Someone had tried to kill him. If he had been leaning forward and over his notepad, the bullet would have driven it into the top of his head. Alex! Mr. Donovan hadn't seen the movement, but he hadn't noticed the tiny round hole in the window. Even if he had, he would have taken him 7 more seconds to put it all together. Snipers do not fire into school classrooms. Certainly not in England. So as you could see, Alex had just had some sort of fit. Either he had been stung by a wasp, or 2 of the other pupils were looking round curiously. The diagrams on the whiteboard suddenly seemed 1,000 miles away. Get down! There could be no mistaken urgency in Alex's voice. Someone is shooting at us! What? Alex was on his feet, backing away from his desk, moving out of the gunman's sight line before he could fire a second shot. He knew that he was in the room. He was putting the entire class in danger. Several of the classmates around him had stood up, making themselves targets. Someone had noticed a hole in the window and knew he was telling the truth. Panic was already sweeping through the time. Get down! Get down! This time he shouted the words, but they still just stood there. Of course, there was Alex Ryder. Everyone knew the rumours about him, that he was involved in things. It's better not to talk about. But this situation was too incredible. It couldn't be happening. There was a second shot. And then Tom yelled and spun around. And to Alex's horror, he saw that his best friend had been shot in the arm. His jacket was torn and blood was already seeping through the sleeve. Everyone on the floor! Mr. Donovan finally took command, and his orders were followed by the crash of upturned desks and chairs as 22 pupils dived for cover. Tom was the last to react, still in shock. When I grabbing his arm, Alex glanced at the window, knowing that he couldn't offer himself as a target. But if the man tried again, Tom would be directly in his line of fire. Alex ran 3 paces and threw himself at his friend, probably tackling him to the floor. Tom howled in pain. His face was completely white. Bells clanged all over the school. Alex hadn't seen him do it all. He guessed Mr. Donovan must have hit the fire alarm before taking cover himself. Everyone was huddling together against the side wall. Alex propped Tom up, quickly examining his wound. There was blood everywhere. It was all over Alex's hands. He didn't think his friend had been too badly hurt. Fresh wound only. If Tom had been unlucky, he might have chipped a bone. But Alex was sure that it got straight in and out. Nobody moved. Move, Mr. Donovan was shouting. We're safe here. Police and the fire engines will be on their way. Brilliant. The rest of the school will be evacuating into the yard, making themselves perfect target for the man on the roof. Alex thought about the warning the maths teacher, trying to explain what had just happened, but then he realised that it didn't matter. This wasn't the case of the psychopath with a grudge against the kid. The man had come here for him. Realizing a surge of anger. So perhaps Alex felt himself almost overwhelmed. He hadn't given up swearing. He hadn't been near six for months. Just a schoolboy trying to get through the day. Someone thought otherwise. Someone had made the cold-blooded decision to send a man with a gun to kill him. to hurt anyone else who had happened to get in his way. Who was it? Was this revenge from something Alex had done in the past? Or was this some new enemy with a new plan of his own? Alex had to know. The sniper got away today. He would be free to come back tomorrow or the day after that. In fact, Alex would be in permanent danger. In the space of a second, he had been plunged back into the old life. He didn't want to be there. He was furious. Alex, what do you do? What do you think you're doing? Alex was already on his feet, still crouching. Mr. Donovan stared at him, afraid to move. Don't leave, Alex. You've got to stay here. But it was too late. Alex crossed the room and thrown open the door. Second after that, he had disappeared, finding his way past hordes of children as they surged down the corridor, following the well-practiced fire drills that would take them outside. As he burst into the yards, he was already fumbling for his keys. Heading for the bike shed, the bells were still ringing. All around him, 2,000 schoolchildren were chatting and laughing, looking out for the smoke while form teachers tried to shut them into the straight lines. Alex ignored them. He found his bike, unlocked it, and jumped on. Alex! Miss Bedfordshire, the school secretary, had seen him. She tried to wave him down. As he ignored her, he pushed down on the pedals hard and swerved round her. Then he was gone, disappearing through the school gates. Flying. Chapter 8. Flying lessons. A sitting target. That was how Alex felt. He was cycling slowly round the side of the school, right next to the buildings where the marksman had been concealed, and he was very aware that the streets were empty with only a few parked cars. There was no witness, and if the sniper was still in place, this time he wouldn't miss. He would imagine the crosshairs of the scope sweeping across the street, setting first on his shoulders, then on the back of his neck. Alex was already there, and one twitch of his finger would send him bobbing over the handlebars and into oblivion. He jerked his head up and saw the rooftop, but saw nothing. Alex was gambling on the fact that the man had already made his gateway. He would have heard the school alarms go off and would have assumed that Alex had been evacuated, with the rest of his class and was lost in the crowds, one uniform among hundreds. Surely that was what he would think. And now, with the police arriving, Alex could hear them now. A group of sirens coming from all points of the compass, closing in on the school. He wouldn't want to hang around. Where was he? Alex had hoped to spot him, and as he left. But there was no visible of the building site, no sign of any movement on the roof or the ladders leading down. He drew to a halt, resting with one foot against the curb, listening for the sound of an engine. Somewhere on the other side of the scaffolding and the half-built walls, there was someone in a hurry to get out of here. Where was he? Every police car in the country would be there in a minute. He didn't want to hang around. When a car appeared at the top of the road, a silver VW Golf, pulling out of the building site and turning away from where Alex was waiting. He couldn't see the driver, but he thought from the shape there was a man, and he seemed to be alone. It had to be the sniper. Alex looked and pushed off again. Behind him, the alarms were still ringing at Brooklyn School. He heard the first police cars arrive, the start of slamming doors, and men's voices barking out commands. There was no time to lose. Any minute now, the roads would be cordoned off. If he was really unlucky, the sniper would get away while he was left behind. The VW was driving quickly without breaking the speed limit, as if not wanting to draw attention to itself. Alex went harder to catch up. At the same time, making sure he didn't get too close. It occurred to him that he had done this before, over a year ago. Then it had been the drug dealer in Skoda. He had followed the man to a barge on the Thames near Putney Bridge. He never thought he would have to repeat the exercise. This time would be more difficult. The dealer had no idea who he was, but one look at the mirror and the sniper would certainly recognize him. And he swung his bike off the road and onto the pavement, crashing behind the parked cars to keep out of sight. London is the slowest moving city in Europe. Cars drive an average of 12 miles an hour, and it's well known that the fastest way to cross the city is on two wheels. As Alex powered up to the pavement, he remembered his uncle complaining as he sat in a jam. I don't know why I bother with a BMW 6-cylinder turbocharged engine. I might as well drive a horse and cart. Alex knew his bike would have the edge of the VW. He could weave in and out of the traffic. He could ignore the lights. He could cut the corners of the pavement, provided they didn't reach any out of the outer dual sidings. He'd be able to keep up. The car reached a T junction and turned left, heading towards the King's Road. Before it disappeared from sight, Alex memorized its number plate. The letter spelled out a word. The letter spelled out a word. Beg. There were plenty of Volkswagens on the London roads, and most of them seemed to be silver. It was helpful that one should have had a registration. Registration. No one should have had a registration. No one should have had a registration. No one should have had a registration. To a registration number. And then the VW signalled right. I just looked for the turn-off, but there wasn't one. There was passing a parade of shops with Esso garage at the end, and that was where the car was heading. I swore. She must have been chasing the wrong one after all. Snow was pulling away from the latest times. Didn't usually stop to fill up with petrol or buy a Twix. He paused for a second time, catching his breath as the VW rolled across the forecourt. He thought about cycling back to Brooklyn, then decided against it. There were too many questions to answer. It was easy just to go home and find Jack. If the car wasn't filling up, without stopping, it had driven straight into the automatic car wash. That was strange because there was a large sign reading out of order. From his vantage, pointing on the other side of the road, Alice watched in puzzlement. As he could see, the driver hadn't even opened his window to drop a toy into the slot. Then, as the VW disappeared behind the plastic screen, brushes began to rotate, and jets of water shot out of the horses running along the walls. It was as if the car wash had been waiting for it. The sign must have been put there to stop any other drivers getting in ahead. I stayed where he was, waiting for the VW to emerge. He was setting down now. Something was strange was going on, and this was, after all, connected in some way with the shooting at his school. He could only make out the shapes of the car. It was lost in a cloud of white foam that mushroomed against the plastic screen. Water and soap suds coursed along the concrete floor. The whole process took 4 minutes. At last the brushes stopped and returned to their starter position. A few seconds later the VW drove out, only it was no longer silver. It was now bright red. Had it been painted inside the car wash? No, exactly the opposite had happened. The silver paint had been stripped off to reveal the red beneath, and the number plate had changed too. Parts of the letters had been washed away so that Beg now read PFC, and the number 88 had become 33. That was all part of the plan. The driver had known the police would be called. After all, a shooting in secondary school. Every police car would be on the lookout for the getaway vehicle. If they were looking for a silver VW with a number plate Beg 88, they would be disappointed. The car had vanished in the thin air. Alex knew now that this was the one man operating on his own. It would have taken a serious organisation to arrange the trip with the car wash. SCORPIA, the triads, they were both enemies of his, but he somehow doubted that either of them would come for him now, after 5 months of inactivity. There was no point. Even so, he would have to be careful. The car would be leading him into further danger, and he was completely on his own. Only Miss Bedfordshire had seen him leave the school. She had no idea which direction he'd taken. Earlier this morning, he'd been congratulating himself that all his troubles were over. Didn't look like that now. Followed the car down the King's Road, and as far as Eelbrook Common, a small patch of green parkland crowded with Chelsea residents walking their dogs. The car was pulling away, travelling at about 30 miles an hour, but luckily he was forced to stop at a red light traffic light. As was able to catch up. Whatever happened, he was determined he wasn't going to let it get away. The car turned off down to Wandsworth Bridge Road, driving straight down to the Thames. And he gritted his teeth and stamped down hard on the pedals. He knew that the roads widened on the other side of the bridge. The bicycle could keep up with the car in the slow-moving traffic, but once they were over the river, he'd have no chance. The car stopped again, and Alice was tempted to move closer. Had to get a look in through the side of the window. It might help later on if he could give the police a description of the driver. All he could see from here was the hunched-up figure of a man wearing a cap. He He was what sort of man would bring himself to fire into a crowded school? How much had he been paid? It made him think again about the car wash. What sort of minds would have dreamed up something like that? What other tricks might they have up their sleeves? Suddenly he was at Wandsworth Bridge. Only a few weeks ago he had rode underneath it, and he had wondered then how it was possible that possibly have been built. Most of the Thames Bridge was very elegant, designed as if to ornament the river. It was just one slab of reinforced concrete, functional and ugly. It was also very long, with 4 lanes of traffic. Alex had to pedal hard to keep up, afraid of being seen, but more afraid of losing the VW altogether. He glimpsed the dark grey water beneath him, stretching into the distance with nothing memorable on either side. The driver came to the roundabout on the other side and accelerated onto it without looking left or right. Alex did the same and was rewarded with a deafening blast of a horn and a fistful of hot, dusty air as a huge truck thundered past inches away. He wobbled slightly as he fought for once, whether his legs were getting tired. It would be just as well if the car did speed off soon. Any further and he might get himself killed. But it seemed the VW had reached its destination and turned off into a narrow drive that snaked back towards the river. When Alex slowed down, as Alex slowed down, he saw it draw into a parking space and stop. A sign read Wandsworth Industrial Park. But it wasn't a park so much as an industrial estate, one of those little pieces of London that had somehow been overlooked. There were a couple of offices, buildings sitting side by side, facing the river. They were modern and unremarkable. 2 stories high with white walls, square windows. One of them advertised a mobile phone company. The other could have been almost anything. A garage, an auto repair service was opposite them near the water's edge, but it seemed to have closed down. The whole area was covered in rubble and strewn with abandoned tyres, oil drums and empty skips. And it stopped at the top of the drive, concealing himself behind a broken wire fence. He wondered how a place like this could have just been left to decay. Put a few houses on it with views over the river, and it would be worth millions. But then again, this wasn't somewhere where people would necessarily want to live. The noise of traffic at Wandsworth Bridge was endless, and the air smelled of diesel. Maybe a few one-down business was all good for. The man got out of the car, reached into his back, and drew out the bag that he had been carrying up on the roof. The bag contained his weapon. Paying out of the rubbish, Alex got a better view of him. He was short, in his 30s, dressed in anorak jeans, and a cap hiding his hair. He was clean-shaven and white. His movements were completely leisurely, as if he were on his way home after a round of golf. He closed the car door, locked it with a remote on his key ring, and began to stroll towards the river. Alex chose this moment, then freewheeled down the slope and came to a skidding halt behind one of the skips. What now? From this new angle, he could see a T-shaped concrete jetty sticking out onto the fast-flowing water of the Thames, long enough to accommodate a dozen carts. But that wasn't what was parked there. A helicopter was waiting, a 2-seater Robinson R22, one of the most popular flying machines in the world. I just recognised the long tail slanting upwards and a tiny bubble of a cabin resting on its grasshopper legs. It was perched at one end, painted grey like the water behind it. Someone must have landed it here for the man at the VW, but if so, it couldn't be taken him very far. As far as Alex could recall, the Robinson had a range of less than 250 miles. Still, that would be enough to get to France. There was now a 3-story building at the other end of the jetty, right next to the river. It could have been a clubhouse for canoeists, or perhaps some sort of outpost for the river police. It was wooden, painted white, but the paint was flaking, and some of the windows were crackled. Alex assumed it was empty, but then the door opened, and the second man came out, walking across the jetty towards the helicopter. The 2 men were about to meet. Alex knew he had to get closer to hear what they said. He was still some distance away, guarded behind the skip. 40 men were looking out onto the river with their backs to him, abandoning his bike. He ran towards them, keeping low behind a slight rise in the ground. He was afraid the sound of his feet in the rubble would give him away, but the drone of the traffic was loud enough to cover it. He threw himself face down just as the two men met. "How did it go?" one from the office asked. "It was fine. Mission accomplished," the sniper replied. He was in the right line. Surely he knew that he missed his target. Maybe it wasn't his interest to admit that he failed. Not if he was hoping to get paid. "Let's go then," the first man said. They set off together, heading for the helicopter. So was that it? Was he just going to lie there and let them fly off? Alex memorized the registration number, A5455H, on the helicopter's tail. If he phoned it through to the police, maybe they could intercept the Robinson before it landed. But it wasn't enough. Alex could still feel the anger that these people had broken in on his life. They had tried to kill him, and they had hurt his best friend. Calling the police would probably do no good at all. He knew what had happened to the car. The pilot pressed the button and changed the registration of the helicopter. Maybe it would turn bright pink in mid-air. Suddenly, Alex was determined he wasn't going to let them get away. He was up and running before he knew what he was going to do. The men had reached the helicopter and were climbing in, too busy concentrating on their own moves to notice him. Alex sprinted diagonally across the yard onto the other side of the jetty. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the sniper buckling himself into his back seat, but he had no clear view of the man's face as the pilot was leaning over him. Alex spun to the right, heading away from them, and a moment later he had reached the three-story building that he had noticed, the one from which the pilot had emerged. He was going to take the two men on by himself. He was empty-handed, but there was always a chance he might find something inside. A high-pressure hose, maybe, or anything he could use as a weapon. At the very worst, there might be a telephone. He left his mobile in his locker at school. His hopes were dashed even as he burst in through the front door. He was in an office complex that might have once belonged to the River Authority. The walls were painted pale green, and there were a few old maps of the Thames and tidal charts pinned to a cork notice board on the wall. It was empty, abandoned. The whole place smelled of damp and decay. Try a door of an office, it wouldn't budge. Outside, he heard the four-clined air-cooled engine and knew that Robinson had started up. It would take about a minute for the rotors to achieve maximum speed, and then it would be gone, disappearing into the sky and out of his reach forever. Alex looked around him. There was nothing here, just looked doors and a tatty staircase covered with peeling formica. Roof. Alex said there was only one thing he could do, one way to get in on his own back on the sniper. The man in the anorak was pretending that he'd succeeded, that he'd hit his target. Well, Alex would show him otherwise. He would stand on the roof in full view, and then at least people who hired him would know that he'd failed. Perhaps they'd give him some sort of punishment for them to lying to them. Thus, certainly he wouldn't get paid. He took the steps two at a time on the top floor. He came across a fire extinguisher strapped to the wall. He grabbed it, wrenched it free. He didn't really know what he was doing. In his mind's eye, he saw himself spraying the cockpit, and the helicopter flew past, blinding the pilot. But that was ridiculous. The wind could whip the phone away before it got anywhere near. Could he have hurled the extinguisher at the rotors? It was certainly heavy enough to do serious damage. It was too heavy to throw, and anyway, the helicopter would be too far away. But it was all he had, and he was still carrying it, as he clambered up the staircase and crashed through a pair of emergency exit doors onto the roof. It took a few seconds to scan his surroundings. The river was right in front of him. Wandsworth Bridge stretched onto the left. The Robinson R22 was balancing on its landing skids. Already the weightless was about to lift off the ground. Pi was now wearing sunglasses and a headset, with coaxing the joystick. The sniper was in the seat behind him. Alex was above them both, but as he thought, he was too far away. However, that was about to change. In a few seconds, the two men would fly right past him. They couldn't go on the other way because of the bridge. The helicopter lurched off the ground effortlessly. It was moving diagonally, heading towards Alex, but at the same time away from him, over the water. But by the time it drew level, it would be at least 50 meters away. He couldn't throw the fire extinguisher that far. If he sent off the foam, he would just end up soaking himself. You want to stay on the top group, Spencer. Try not to behave like a year 5. So Alex remembered Mike Spencer in the classroom. After he had noticed the sniper, he had been using a bendy ruler to fire a rubber at another pupil. Could you possibly work? Yes, why not? There was a TV area right on the edge of the roof, But the fact that he was swaying meant it was surely had to bend. The aerial had 4 metal antennas that came together in the shape of a V. Ice ran over to it. He hoisted the fire extinguisher up so that it rested in the V. Then he would use both hands to pull it back. The whole thing bent towards him. Ice could feel the metal straining. He let go. He would launch the fire extinguisher halfway across the river. That was one advantage of being 15. If he hadn't been this strong a year ago, suddenly the helicopter was at level with him. Failing his vision, he could feel the wind from the rotors beating at him, threatening to blow him off the roof, and the engine howled in his ears. His hair whipped around his eyes, half blinding him. But he had a clear view of the sniper through the back of the window. The man turned and saw him. His eyes widened in shock. He shouted something. The pilot seemed to have frozen too. The helicopter wasn't moving. It was dangling there, the perfect target right in front of him. Let's let go of the fire extinguisher. The TV area whipped forward, propelling it like a medieval catapult. The red metal cyclone hit the cockpit, an oversized bullet that smashed into the glass, sending cracks in every direction. It wasn't enough to bring the helicopter down, but the pilot jerked back instantly, losing control. Hank threw himself to the ground as the tail of the helicopter swung round, slicing through the air inches above where his head had just been. He felt another blast of air tearing at his shirt and jacket, trying to drag them off his shoulders. For a brief second he glimpsed the terrific face of the sniper upside down. Or at least that was how it seemed to him. The pilot was fighting for control. Might have regained it because the tail rotor clipped the edge of the building. There was a dreadful grinding and a snapping sound as part of the blade broke off, lying flat on the roof. Ice covered his head with his hands, afraid that he was about to be torn to pieces. A slice of broken metal shot past him and shattered in the brickwork, and then the helicopter was gone, yanked into the air as if it was a fish on the end of an invisible line. It was completely directionless, spinning round and round and round. Ice dragged himself to his knees, gazing at his handiwork with a sense of disbelief. The helicopter was a mad thing. He wondered what sort of nightmare the pilot and the passenger were experiencing inside. It was still moving fast. Already it was a quarter of a mile away, mercilessly flying upriver, away from Wandsworth Bridge. I stood up. The helicopter tried to right itself, but it wasn't going anywhere. It hovered briefly, then crashed down into the river. There was a great explosion of white water, and then nothing. Alice couldn't see any more. Were the 2 men dead? Alice didn't know, and in truth, she didn't really care. He had given them a lesson they richly deserved. They richly deserved. After all, one of them had just tried to kill him. He had opened fire in a classroom full of kids and hadn't cared what might result. Alice wondered if Tom House was all right. He was sure the injury hadn't been too serious, but he knew all too well the shock of being wounded by gunfire. He thought about phoning him, but then remembered again that he left his mobile at school. He limped back in through the emergency exit, climbed down the stairs and went in search of his bike. Right, everybody, I don't think I have time to read you the next chapter. It's too long. 20 more pages. Well, let's read quickly. Right, chapter 9. Safety measures. Sitting in the back of the seat was Chaffle-driven Jaguar XJ6. Alan Blunt was in a bad mood. He hadn't spoken a word in the 30 minutes it had taken them to drive from Liverpool Street, gazing out the window with an arrow expressionless eye, as if the entire city had somehow offended him. Miss Jones was next to him, and she knew exactly what he was thinking. The two of them were breaking every rule in the book. They were on their way to see Alex Rider when he should have been summoned to see them. They already knew what had happened at Brooklyn, but then, of course, the whole country did. A gun attack on a school in West London was the sort of story that would travel instantly all over the world, and the intelligence services had been forced out quickly to rein in. This was Alex Rider's school. They had made the connection immediately and had done everything they could to turn media attention. There was no sniper, they said, and certainly no sniper rifle. It was just some local vandal with an air gun who had managed to break into the building site and fired a couple of shots at the school windows. One boy had been slightly injured, but nobody had been killed. Even so, the shooting had been the main story on the all 6 o'clock bulletins, and would be on the front pages next day. Tom Harris had been filmed in the hospital bed with one arm in the sling round by cars, and doctors had looking quite happy to be in the centre of so much attention. Police had mounted roadblocks all over Fulham and Chelsea. The Home Secretary had promised that she would be making a statement to the House. All children in Brookland were being offered counselling would be closed for the rest of the week. As a result of a media frenzy, the two other stories were given less attention than they might otherwise have received. In a completely unrelated accident, a helicopter crashed into the River Thames near Wandsworth Bridge. Police were still looking for the pilot and any passengers. No names had been released, and in Greece, one of the world's richest men, Yanis Ariston Xenopoulos, had died after a long fight against cancer. He had left behind a fortune of more than £20 billion. Alan Blunt had been in one of his regular meetings with the chiefs of staff when the news came in. He had left at once, joining Miss Jones for emergency briefing. It was obvious to both of them that Alice had been the target. The sniper had missed, but that much was known. But Alex seemed to have disappeared. He had last been circling away from the school when Blunt heard about the helicopter crash just 1 hour later. He assumed there must be a connection that would have been typical of Alex. He was a boy of extraordinary resource. Alex finally arrived at home in the middle of the afternoon. Jack was shocked by what happened, and when Miss Jones called her a short while later, she was in no mood for an argument. "We need to talk, Alex," Mrs. Jones said. "We'll send a car round to bring him to Liverpool Street." I'm sorry, Miss Jones. There was an ice in Jack's voice. "Alex isn't going anywhere. I can understand that you want to debrief him, but if you want to see him, you'll have to come here. That's out of the question." "Fine, then you can forget about talking to him." Before Miss Jones could interrupt, Jack continued. "Every time Alex has been into that building of yours, he's had nothing but trouble. Last time was January. He came to see you because he had a journalist chasing him after him. And what happened? You sent him to spy on Desmond McCain, and he ended up in Kenya before being almost fed to the crocodiles. Well, that's all over now. He doesn't work for you anymore. If you want to talk to him about what happened this morning, you'll come over here. But don't leave it too late. He's a tough day, and I want him in bed before 10. I was unheard of for the head of MI6 Special Operations and his deputy to be summoned in this way. Secret conversations need to take place in a secure environment, and Blunt's office was exactly that. Nobody could enter without being scanned for weapons or recording event devices. Any form of eavesdropping was out of the question. The windows had even been threatened to deflect radio and microwave beams. It was impossible to find out who had been there and for what reason. Visiting Alex at his home in Chelsea would change all that. It was a completely unacceptable risk. And yet, early that evening, the car drew up outside the elegant, white front house that had once belonged to Alan Wilder and Alan Blunt. Alan Blunt and Miss Jones stepped out. Jack had refused to budge from her position, and in the end, they'd have to accept that this was the only way. But then, of course, Alice was no ordinary agent. Recruiting him in the first place had broken all the rules. Perhaps they should have been prepared to make an exception. Alice was waiting for them in the living room. Blunt could see at once that he was very different from the 14-year-old he had so often employed. It wasn't that he was bigger, so that he felt that more. He was more confident too. Looking at him, Blunt was suddenly reminded of Alex's father. The resemblance was really quite remarkable. Jack offered coffee, which was politely declined. She had already given Miss Jones a full description of what happened after Alex left the school, and the deputy head of special operations didn't waste any time. "We have divers and police down at the river," she began. "It seems like both the police and his passenger managed to escape from the helicopter. Suddenly no bodies had been washed up. He thought someone would have seen two dripping wet men climbing out of the Thames. Trackmount. We're making inquiries. We're still looking." Miss Jones glanced at Alan Blunt sitting opposite her. It does seem strange that they managed to vanish into thin air. This is broad daylight in the middle of London. They must have been injured, and yet, as far as we can tell, no one has any sight of them. "Did you see the sniper, Alex?" Blunt asked. "Not clearly." Alex had changed into jeans and a t-shirt. He was barefoot, as if stressed that this was his home, and he would dress how he liked. It felt strange having Blunt in the room, as if two worlds should have been kept apart and somehow coiled in. He was too far away, and he had his back to me, but I got the numbers of the car and the helicopter. "They were both fake," Miss Jones said. We found the car. We picked it up from Wandsworth Park and running tests for fingerprints and DNA. We also salvaged the wreckage of the helicopter, but I'm afraid that I have my doubts that either of them will lead us anywhere. They were professional people, Blunt agreed. That trick with the car wash, for example, that showed a certain style. Whose style? Jack asked. We don't know. We've spoken to an owner of the garage. He says that he was paid to close the car wash for a couple of days, and he doesn't know anything else. We think he's telling the truth, but the main question we have to ask ourselves and who would want to kill Alex and why now? And more to the point, how do we stop them trying again? Alex examined the head of MI6 Special Operations. He was sitting in the back on the edge of the sofa, with very straight back, as if he was determined not to make himself comfortable. As usual, Blunt was completely businesslike, just in a slate grey suit with steel-rimmed spectacles and highly polished black leather shoes. Despite what he had said, he had somehow made it clear that it didn't really matter to him if Alex lived or died. The only thing was to be a nuisance or something else to be dealt with a busy day. They think I'm dead, Alex said. The sniper told the pilot. He said mission accomplished. I heard him. That may not so necessarily be the case, Miss Jones said, and once again she half glanced at Blunt, and if she was sure that she could continue. First of all, we have to assume that the sniper was aiming at you. This was a very risky and expensive operation. Whoever was behind it must have very serious reason to wish you harm. It's clear for what you say that the sniper lied to his employees. We even say they'd probably guessed that you're alive. When the helicopter crashed 10 minutes later, they'd have known for sure. Whichever way you're looking at Alex, you're probably still in danger. And I'm afraid you're going back to school is out. You're going back to school is out of the question, until we sort it out. How long would that be? Some people might have thought him mad, wanting to go back to school, but he'd been enjoying the term. Everything had been going well for him. He wanted to stay with his friend. It's impossible to say. We have no idea who the enemy is or even why they've chosen now to attack you. At the moment, we have no clues. We are as much in the dark as you. How are you going to keep Alex safe? Tax demanded. How are you going to stop them trying again? Blunt and Mr. exchanged looks. Suddenly Alex realized they had worked this out. They had known what they were going to say before they had walked through the front door. The same thing had happened after he had been attacked in Cornwall, white surfing with Serena. They had the situation then. They do the same now. I think Alex has to leave the country. Blunt began. No way! Please, Miss Starbright, allow me to finish. He can't go back to Brooklyn and he can't stay here. As Miss Jones says, it's too dangerous. You could give him 24-hour protection. We'll have people watching the house tonight, but in the long term, 24-hour protection doesn't exist. If an enemy is determined enough, he'll break through the tightest barrier no matter how carefully it's being constructed. No. While we investigate this business, Alice will be much safer with a new identity somewhere far away. Do you have somewhere in mind? As a matter of fact, I do. Blunt coughed delicately, his hand forming a comma in front of his mouth. I want him to go to Egypt. He said, Egypt? To Cairo, to be precise. It just so happens that I need to send one of my people out there. Anyway, Alex isn't one of your people. Jack cut in. Blunt ignored her. He turned directly to Alex. I wasn't going to involve you, Alex. You've made your feelings very clear. And of course I've tried to respect them, but circumstances have changed. You need our help, we need yours. I have a job which is ideally suited to you. At the same time, it'll take you far away and keep you safe. What job? Alex asked. The two words fell heavily from his lip. It's just a question of being in the right place and keep your eyes open. If you want to do is report back, and we'll do the rest. Blunt paused, waited for any argument, and when none came, he went on. The place is a school, a very good school. As it happens, you won't even need to miss any of your studies. It's called the Cairo International College of Arts and Education. Most students refer it to CC or Cairo College. It's for boys and girls aged 13 to 18. And there's a junior school too. Many of the parents are working in the Middle East. Some of them are high profile, some of them are very rich. We have received information that suggests some of the hostile activity could take place when we're there sometime soon. Unfortunately, we don't know when, and we have no idea what exactly it might entail. A kidnapping might be possible. Some of these parents could afford millions of pounds as a ransom, if I were to demand. Have you warned the school? Jack asked. I'm not sure warning would do any good, Blunt replied. Not until we know more. However, we do have a line of investigations. Last week, the man by the name of Eric Gunter, it seems very unlikely that he will be involved in anything illegal. Matter of fact, he's a war hero. He was decorated by the Queen, but we don't believe his arrival was just a coincidence. What happened to the last head security secretary? Alex Blunt swallowed. He had an accident. All we're asking you to do, Alex, is keep an eye on this man and report anything suspicious back to us. There's no need for you to get involved. At the first sign of trouble, we'll step in. Wait a minute, Jack exclaimed. I can't believe you people. We asked you to come here because someone just took a shot at Alex. His best friend was almost killed, but also you want to use him again? We want to protect him, Miss Jones insisted. Honestly, Jack, it does seem to be the best solution. No one will think of looking for him in Karu. We'll give him a false name, and the best thing in international school is that the students come and go. The parents are always on the move. Nobody will ask questions when a new face shows up. Meanwhile, we'll investigate the car and the helicopter. Everything will let you know as soon as it's safe for Alex to come home. It should be more than a few weeks. She fell silent. Diana was looking straight at Alex, waiting for him to reply. Jack shook her head, clearly unhappy. Alex realized it was all up to him. At the same time, he wondered if he really had any choice. Only that morning he had been celebrating the fact that his life had returned to normal. Out of the tunnel. That was what he had thought. But why be so naive? The tunnel reached out to draw him back. And once again, it was lost in its darkness. I don't mind going, he said. Mr. Blunt is right. If there's someone going after me, I can't stay here. I can't risk anyone getting else hurt because of me. I could take you to America. You could go anywhere in the world. I need to be at school somewhere, Jack. I've started my GCSEs. I don't want to get any further behind. Then we're agreed. Actually, I have a few questions, Jack cut in. Where is Alex going to live in Carew? Who's going to look after him? Is the international colleague at boarding school? No! Miss Jones shook her head. We'll have to find him a flat. Then make sure it has 2 bedrooms because I'm going to. Alex turned to Jack in surprise. He could hear from the tone of her voice that there will be no argument. I'm fair with sitting at home while you put Alex in harm's way, Jack went on. I know you said he won't be in any danger, but that's what you said last time before. But if Alex agrees to go, then that's his decision. I'm not letting him alone. That's mine. Both of us, or not at all. You call Miss Jones. Lucia thought for a moment, then nodded. I think it's a good idea, she said. Alex was still gazing at Jack. Are you really sure? He asked. I've never been more certain about anything. That's great, Sally smiled. We can see the pyramids together and the Nile. It'll be fun to have you with me. You can leave all the arrangements to us, Mom said. The alert of our Cairo office that you're on your way. They'll give you everything you need. Excuse me. Then it seems we're all agreed, Alex said. She got up and led Alex, Alan, Blood and Miss Jones to the door. The car was waiting for them, parked outside. Meanwhile, Alex stayed sitting on his own, his head in a whirl. Part of him was excited that he couldn't help himself. Cairo! It was an amazing city, somewhere he had never been before, and yet at the same time, he felt a great weight on his shoulders. It's happening again. They came back in. They're gone, he said. Thanks, Jack. He stood up. I was saying you'd come with me. I wasn't going to let it happen any other way. Just for a moment, Jack remembered that she had been planning to tell Alex her plans this evening. Had she really been thinking of abandoning him and of moving on? But Washington and her parents would have to wait. I guess they'll have to give me a new ID too, she said. I wonder what I'm going to look like with a fake moustache. He sighed. Are you going to do any homework? I don't think there's any point. Why don't I make some supper? And you see what's on TV. And Blob was in a better mood as they headed back towards Liverpool Street. Miss Jones had noticed the difference. So you got what you've wanted? She said. Yes. Ron avoided her eye. It's funny how things work out sometimes. Think you've forgotten to mention that Scorpia might be involved? I didn't forget. I prefer not to alarm him. But he might have decided not to go. I would have said, all in all, that it's better for him to keep an open mind. They drove on in silence. I want him to have backup in Cairo, Miss Jones announced suddenly. Who do you have in mind? Hunt knew there was a time when his deputy would never have spoken to him so directly. But he will soon be gone. Power was already transferring to her. We could send Crawley back out perhaps, or Gerard. I was thinking of Smithers. An interesting choice. I trust him, and he may come in useful, particularly if Scorpia do show up. Do you have any objection? Of course not, Miss Jones. Whatever you think best. The strange thing was that Blunt had been right all along. He never should have left Liverpool Street, and he certainly shouldn't have visited Alex at home. He and Miss Jones had been filmed getting out of the car from the window of the house opposite. The owners were on the holiday in Thailand and should have returned by now. They had fallen ill with food poisoning and they were being treated in hospital in Bangkok. Scorpia had arranged this just as they had arranged for one of their teams to break into the house and set up the cameras on the second floor. Alex's home had also been bugged. Two men dressed as telephone engineers had slipped in while Jack was out of the shops and had placed recording devices in the kitchen, living room, both bedrooms, and even dotted around the garden. The entire conversation with Albert and Miss Jones had been recorded. I want him to go to Egypt. I have a job which is ideally suited to you. I'll alert our Cairo officers that you're on your way. They'll give you everything you need. We'll give him a false name. It'll all be recorded, time-coded and filed. Proof that MI6 had once employed Alex. Why don't send him to the Middle East? It'll be added to the Horseman file over the next few days. That file will start to grow. Arison might be dead, but his work would continue. Scorpia's operation had begun. Goodbye, everyone, and thank you for listening to this.